Nice. Nice.
It's me, Frost! I'm fucking feeling it!
Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we're going to be going over Bleed Lethal Mirage. Now, before we get into the video, I would heavily suggest leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as that is the best way of making more content like this appear in your sub box. Now, of course, Bleed Lethal Mirage. There's a few things that have changed this patch to make this build viable. Mainly, the addition of cooldown recovery speed as a stackable affix. Now, before 0.9, if you're new, you were only able to get cooldown recovery speed on one place, just generic amounts of it. And that is on the prefix of the helmet, and you can only ever get 12%, which was never really enough to make anything work per se. And I've played a variant of Lethal Mirage before, and it worked well using, of course, the double daggers, you know, the cooldown daggers and stuff like that. And that was enough to make the build viable for a crit version. And of course, I never thought that bleed would be viable, mainly because, you know, you want your cooldown to be low enough so that you can actually kill packs in the monolith. Because one of the biggest problems with Lethal Mirage is not its damage, is its clear. Because if you don't, you know, Lethal Mirage enough, you can't clear monoliths properly. So of course, all that cooldown that we got this patch is severely needed. Right now we're at a 6.2 second cooldown for the Lethal Mirage, which is plenty fine for me. It works perfectly fine for me, which is great and wonderful. And the clear on it is actually kind of fantastic now, thanks to being able to use the Corsair's hood with that massive 80% increased area, then 3 idols with increased area as well. All of that combined makes each individual Mirage attack hit a very large area, making it so packs of spiders and stuff just instantly get wiped out. And of course, the more things that you kill per Mirage, right, the more Mirages that will appear on, of course, the big bad guys, right, the big raiders and stuff like that. So it just exponentially helps your clear having this increased area. And that's one of the benefits of the bleed version, is being able to have the helmet, giving it so much area. Now, other things that are interesting over the crit version, this version is a lot tankier in general, mainly because you can run dodge percentage on the suffix of swords, and that combined with our dodge scaling from specifically from smoke shrouds, stuff like that. As you can tell in the footage, I'll be sitting in the smoke cloud and I'll be getting insane amounts of dodge, and I'll be getting dodge from perfection stacks as well. And all of that combined makes it so that in a boss fight, I'm almost untouchable, especially thanks to the silver shrouds as well that we gain from smoke bomb and all that. And of course, we gain silver shrouds more often because of this cooldown, which is great as well. All of this combined means that we're sitting around like 60% dodge and 60% armor during boss fights, even without a throne, which is amazing for just bossing in general. And that's why in the T4 Jirla footage, you can actually see me just kind of just shrugging most things off, other than the dots, of course, because damage over time sucks. Now, one other thing that is something that's a little bit more annoying with this build is you have to wait for enemies to die. While you're doing bosses, it's fine, but for clear, it's kind of annoying because, like, you know, you Lethal Mirage, and normally the reason why Lethal Mirage is so good is you press the button, everything's dead. But sadly, due to the way Lethal Mirage is right now, right, with the bleed version, not everything is dead instantly. They'll die eventually. You have an insane amount of bleed duration. Like, you have like 8-second bleeds. Like, it lasts forever. But the problem is, of course, it's not all of that is applied at once. Now, thankfully, we have puncture and the node inside puncture that allows us to pop bleeds. That's why I'm able to chunk bosses like that. And one of the nice things is the first chunk, right, from the boss will not like trigger, like it will not be with Bastiar, right? Like Bastiar will not hit it. It's just the chunks after that will be hit by Bastiar, because guess what? You remove half of a boss's HP. EHG doesn't really like that, and they come and cuff you. So please remove Bastiar, please. Yeah, this build's great. Like I said, this is more of a bosser than like a monolith clear. I wouldn't push corruption with something like this. I would just mainly just kill T4 Jurla and just other bosses. Like you're just spamming bosses. The problem with boss killers in general in the game right now is there's not that many uses for them yet currently, but it's really fun to pop shades in Jurla like you saw in the footage. So that's all good and dandy. One of the best things about this build, like I said though, is how cheap it is to build. If you're wondering, well, Dread, don't you have a Corsair set, a Valdir's, and Assault the Wound? Well, guess what? Thanks to all of the bleed penetration that we have on Lethal Mirage's tree and everywhere else, I think Salt the Wound only gives us like 10 to 15% more damage. I'm pretty sure if you drop Salt the Wound altogether and just scaled percentage damage instead of crit multi, you might end up with more damage than you see here, which is very interesting to note. Also, as well, Valdir's. Valdir's can be replaced by a Bleeding Heart, which is fine. And then, of course, the helmet. The helmet, I don't think I would replace it, but the helmet's not very rare at all, so just getting one is pretty easy. The biggest problem with the helmet though is the rolls, because it has a really large roll range, right? But all of this combined leads to a fun build. I've been enjoying it. I hope you guys enjoy it. With all that being said, let's go in game, shall we, for a more detailed look. All right, here we are in game with the build here with the character. So first off, we're going to talk about the skills. First off, Lethal Mirage. Thankfully, with all of the changes to cooldown recovery speed, we no longer need this node synchronized to make the clear feel good. So we can dump synchronize because it's a gigantic investment. Also, it makes it so you spend less time in Lethal Mirage, which is bad because you're immune to damage while you're inside Lethal Mirage. So you want it to last as long as humanly possible, right? So thankfully, we don't have to run these nodes anymore. Mainly, all you really care about is specifically Umbral Feast, Shadow Eater, right? So you get more damage per shadow, and you also get additional mirages per shadow. So this is 5 additional mirages, while also giving you like 200% more damage. Also as well, you get more mirages here, more mirages there. You can get a mirage or 2 on the chest. I actually don't have that, by the way. That could be way more damage. And of course, 4 points in illusory edge for just that physical penetration, right? So for instance, if you think about it with Salt the Wounds, this is equivalent to like 80% crit multi, which is interesting. But overall, I like this setup. I would not go for Rending Darkness. I think it's kind of a bait. It's a lot of points to get there, right? It's a lot of points to get there. And I don't think you're going to be able to like maintain it, especially duration per crit check. Now, of course, what you can do is you can grab the always crit, and then this will always be at 6 seconds, but I don't think this part is worth it at all. I think this is like the perfect tree. If you manage to get plus levels of Lethal Mirage on your Valdir Shell somehow, if you're a Giga Chad, probably just put it into probably Fizz Pen or 1 extra point into the damage. There's not really much else. Maybe the Shadow Cascade instead. I don't know. But yeah, overall, it's great. Now for shift is a little bit more complicated. Specifically, we want 3 points into Bazooka's Hesitation because it's 30% more damage. It's not worth putting more points into Deadly Ambush because we're already point starved on our shift tree as it is. 4 points travel into Hypovolmia, which is a lot of bleed chance for free. Jagged Cuts, this is what makes this build even function early on. This node allows you to play Bleed Lethal Mirage without any uniques whatsoever, because you get an insane amount of bleed duration, you get an insane amount of pen, because if you did not know, this applies to the whole next attack, including every single strike. So every single strike will have 75% penetration and 75% bleed duration. So that is wonderful. Now, of course, then we travel 2 points Shadow Recuperation, then 5 points into Sleight of Hand so that we get a bunch of armor. We are stacking a lot of flat armor thanks to stuff like Perfection stacks and stuff like this. So having an increase to that armor is like mandatory. Now for puncture here, it's your stereotypical utility puncture setup. The only difference, like I said, is getting mutilate so that we can not only give a little bit of life gain while we're mapping, it also pops the bleed, makes for those fun explosions. It doesn't actually add much damage per se, it's just for fun. And of course, the utility of getting the health per stack. I usually say that the Abyssal Echo's bleed pop is bait, and that is because it doesn't actually do anything outside of making the bleed pop. Well, this has actual utility because it gives you a bunch of health per stack consumed. You can get hundreds of bleeds on a single enemy. So like when you're on an Oribus, you pop it, you get like 500 health back. And if you manage to get plus levels of puncture, which actually work well with this build because of the fact that its physical damage percentages is hybrid mod, right? So you can get like 90% increased physical damage. You can also put extra points into mutilate to get even more health gained on that. And you'll always heal to full every single time you mutilate, which is great. Then 4 points into Bloodthirst because bleed chance, then of course hunger. So we get 6 stacks. You want to get those 6 stacks, then shift, then lethal mirage, and do all the damage. It's great. Now smoke bomb. Smoke bomb is how I am currently getting my, of course, lethal, like all my shadows. Now you could technically use synchronized strike, but the biggest problem with synchronized strike is you're gonna have problems with mana, as I'll mention later. But it's behind my chair here. Here it is. Umbral Assault. This combined with Lingering Fumes means we get about 5 shadows if we wait for the perfect timing, and that will allow us to, of course, get as many shadows as we need for this node, Umbral Feast. So we get a bunch of extra lethal mirages, and of course we go for Moonlight Bomb with the cooldown coverage speed. We're already at 6.5 seconds of smoke bomb cooldown, which is insane because before it would only ever get to like 8 seconds. So the Silver Shroud stack is insane now. And of course, the Dust Shrouds gives us a large amount of flat dodge, which is then multiplied by our percentage dodge we have on our swords. Then, of course, the extra rate, and then this will just make the circle bigger, so we have more places to move around. And shurikens, it's your stereotypical setup with the armor setup. There's not really much different here. It's the stereotypical setup, mainly pierce so that your blades don't go away when you shift. You get the increased duration, increased armor, and of course, one nice little thing is you do get access to free physical shred, which is nice. You're always constantly on max physical shred stacks, which is absolutely wonderful. That's pretty much it for the skills. Now for the passives here, the more important passives specifically are stuff like sapping strikes so that you get mana back with your puncture, right? And then 8 points into coated blades. This makes it whenever you use a melee or bow attack that costs mana, it consumes additional mana to deal more damage. So we get almost double our damage for an extra 40 mana, which is a very, very good trade-off when we're playing a build like this where we want to hit as hard as humanly possible, right? Then for Bladedancer, just grab all the bleed stuff, the usual bleed stuff, some Crimson Shroud chance, so you get some extra bleed chance. You want to grab 8 points into weapons of choice because the whole reason we're using double swords is for that ginormous 40% glancing blow chance. This allows us to cap our glancing blow chance very easily, and it's wonderful. And of course, we're going all into perfection stacks. Now, while clearing, perfection isn't really good, right? It gives us 100%, it gives us, I think, 100% increased damage, gives us 500 flat armor, 500 dodge, which is insane, by the way, with all of our increases, right? But the problem is we lose all stacks of perfection when we take damage. Now, of course, that doesn't really matter when you're dealing with like T4 Gorilla or something, right? Because you're just stab, 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 lethal mirage, right? So you don't really have to worry about it on bosses specifically because they don't hit you enough for this to be down all the time. But while you're clearing, it will be down all the time, which is fine because we only need it on bosses. And of course, we take 1 point to exuberance. So we, of course, get 2 stacks instead. So it takes 5 hits, which is very easy to do with puncture. 1 point to Shadow Master for that extra maximum shadow. Increased shadow damage does nothing for us because the way that Lethal Mirage works is it consumes the shadow instead of actually, making the shadow deal damage, right? Which is good to know. Then, of course, 8 points into Death's Door, which is just less damage taken at low health, just a little bit of extra chunk. And that's pretty much it for passives. Now for gearing here, or actually, let's talk about blessings. Yeah. So I went ahead and got a Void Res blessing. This helped me fix my gear. So you want to go for Void Res here. You want to go for Lightning Res on Lagan, Crit Avoid, on here, or you can get bleed chance if you manage to get some exalted crit avoid stuff. But mainly for my gear, I needed this crit avoid specifically. But eventually, when you get better gear, you can go bleed chance here. Here you go for percentage armor, of course, and of course for Spirit's Fire you go flat armor, so that you have a bunch of armor while standing still, which is great. And of course this gets even higher when we shift around and stuff, and that allows us to actually tank boss abilities and stuff like that. Now, of course, for the items, idols specifically, it's a combo of increased area with lethal Mirage attacks, and of course, increased physical damage over time. Find a combo that fits for you. If you need more res, you can always take out one idol slot or two and like put in some extra res idols. That's what I was doing before I fixed my res better with my void res blessing. Now for the helmet, this is great because it gives us a bunch of fizz penetration and bleed duration. That increased area of Mirage attacks is insane, by the way. Also, as well, they put it on the best base they possibly could, the cooldown base. Obviously, mine isn't rolled well, but you can get up to 12% CD, which is great because you're playing a skill that has CD, right? Then, of course, Salt the Wound. This actually isn't that necessary. It adds like maybe like I think like 30% more damage or something like that. It's actually not necessary. You can get away with not using this. I'm just using it because I am a certified DPS whore. And of course, Valerie's Chalice, I got lucky. I got fizz damage on it. I was trying to get the crit multi on it, but whatever. And the bleed duration is insane. The leech is insane. The health on kill per stack of bleed, that essentially keeps us topped off while we're in monos, right? But this actually isn't mandatory as well. You could actually just go with like a freaking +4 to lethal Mirage or something else. Like you don't actually need this, and you don't actually need this. I would say that you want this. You don't need it, but you want it direly because that increased area makes your clear so much better, right? Then for the amulet, just damage over time, health. Eventually, instead of that other prefix, you can go crit multi. And of course, this sword, I got one sword that was like this, right? I got a really strong sword here. And you know what I did? I doubled it with Rune of Creation. That's one of the best things about playing a dual wield class, like a dual wield build like this, is you get to abuse Rune of Creation. Oh, look, I got one good item. Oh, now I got two good items. And that's when it starts going crazy, right? And this is like a lot of crit multi. So to put it into perspective, right? My Salt the Wound, it gives 40% of added critical strike multiplier as Fizz Pen. So we take the crit multi. So it's like 90 per, that's 180. 180 times 4, that's like, it's like 42% Fizz Pen just from the crit multi alone on both these. And of course, the bleed chance is insane. The dodge chance is insane because that skills are, of course, our perfection stacks and stuff like that. We're at 60% dodge whenever we're killing a boss, which is great. And that percentage damage is, we don't need the attack speed at all because Lethal Mirage doesn't scale off attack speed. Of course, Puncture does, but the thing is like, we already have enough attack speed on the tree to make Puncture feel good, so we don't need attack speed on our weapons, which makes this wonderful. And of course, you want to dual wield swords for that juicy glancing blow so that you don't feel as bad for not running a shield. Now, of course, the ring, just fizz damage. I went for just res because I needed it, but eventually you want opal rings like this one with crit avoid and all that and fizz damage. Of course, you could have much better gear than I have. The belt isn't crazy. You don't really need, like, you just mainly need the CD, some HP, fizz damage, maybe cleanse. The boots, of course, these are my crazy boots. You can get better than this though, but I would go for like exalted cooldown recovery speed because the more you can use your lethal Mirage, the better your clear will be. And like I said, Valdir's and all that. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the build. With all that being said, this has been Trad. Bye.